So you can see that it's not only actually an issue around men and women relationships, because this time she's exploited by another woman, and you can also see that in the case of the second story in that hospital, the nurses did not really provide the help that was due. So in terms of issues, here we have a number of issues that need to be addressed with regard to rural women. So some of the issues are related to the general context, and here you would excuse me, but I would talk more about Africa because that's the region I know much more. That's where my expertise is. But generally, our rural areas are poor, and that poverty of rural areas is reflected in the lack of welfare provisioning in general, and there are fewer economic opportunities in rural areas. And this touches on roads, vehicles, but also water, energy supply, healthcare facilities, schools, and so on. We can also very clearly, when you look at the population trends in Africa, you can see that there is quite a feminization of rural population due to migration, either to urban areas or international migration. And here I will quote, and this of course goes with the more women-headed households in rural areas in Africa. Here I'm quoting the FAO, which said the absence of husbands as a result of rural-urban migration is a cause of the feminization of farming in Africa. And another FAO document dated in 1999 shows that while the proportion of the labor force working in agricultural activities declined over the 1990s, the proportion of women working in agriculture increased, particularly in developing countries. So it is evidence, it's there. And we can also see that the feminization of the rural populations has gone with the feminization of poverty, and they are mutually reinforcing, because you have more people in rural areas, and rural areas are poorer, therefore you have more poor women in rural areas. And generally, you can also feel that gender inequalities are more acute in rural areas due to a number of issues. In terms of gender role differentiation, which are imposed by the traditional society, it's in terms of production patterns, who produces what, is it in the productive or reproductive sector? The reproductive is anything around caring for the family and the communities. And we all know that in terms of women's work, it's not the kind of work that we can just say, it doesn't generate enough economic returns, therefore I'm not doing it. They don't have that choice. So you have these enormous amounts of tasks that need to be performed, and it is put on women's time. So women's time poverty is there, and of course it is an impediment to anything around empowerment through education, through leisure, because those are activities that you cannot delegate, and unless you free time from other reproductive tasks, you cannot really do it. Nobody can sleep for you if you are tired. Or learn for you if you want to be knowledgeable. Okay, but there are also a number of issues around the gender entitlement systems, which determines who must have access to land, seeds, but also improved kind of seeds, fertilizers, access to other properties, such as properties or skills, such as those given by the agricultural extension services. So there are a number of gender gaps in there. Generally, in terms of women's work burden, we talked about the amount of it, the workload of it, but we also have the intensity, the multitasking. In rural Africa, it is very common to see a woman with a baby on the back she's cooking at the same time, and she's going to fetch water. So those are 3 tasks. And for those working on time use, you would see that sometimes when you add them separately, you end up with days of 40 hours a day. Because if the tasks were performed separately, it would require much more time. There is also the absence of choice. That's what I said. You cannot give up those tasks because they don't bring return. And there is the biggest problem is also the issue of invisibility. You do it, but it's not accounted for, it is not recognized, it's not in national accounting systems, and your contribution in the economy is not valued. So in terms of gender roles, here I will again quote an example from Tanzania, where it is said that in Tanzania, a reduction of women's time burden led to increase in household income by 10%, labor productivity by 15%, and productivity of capital by 44%. And this is a study that was conducted in 1944. There are also a number of quite some data on access to land and in relation to the kind of land ownership. Do you have a land title, or it is just an usufruct kind of use? And you would see that women are more into those kind of use where they are lent or they are given the opportunity to cultivate the land, but actually it doesn't belong to them. It is not part of their property. So these are quite some issues, but I would like to focus a little bit more on what can be done. What can be done to address issues of rural women? And here we can put it in various levels of interventions. And I liked what the song that we heard in the beginning said, when she said, why can't there be enough food for everybody? And I would like to say that currently we really have a huge food crisis in Africa because we want to protect the environment. We want Canada to remain the country for polar bears. But it has impacted on the use of wheat, for the production of biofuel, and you have a number of African communities feeling it in terms of increased prices of commodities for food. And this is really the debate where we are now, because we know that women are primarily responsible for food security in the family. And those are issues that we need to take into account. So at the policy level, there is need to have more normative policy and legal frameworks to institutionalize gender equality in rural development initiatives, but also women's empowerment generally. Because here we have all those commitments, but there is no implementation. You have commitment at an international level. The regions in Africa, we have quite a number of legal frameworks on gender equality issues. Some of them assorted with accountability by heads of states to report on the progress they are making. But actually, the implementation is not there. So to implement, you really need to go beyond the legal frameworks and have the right laws at the national level, the right legal frameworks, the right kind of institutions to implement whatever decision has been made. But also to look at some of the laws that we have in place and which are discriminatory. For example, a colleague of mine is used to say, if men made the law, we keep talking about the rule of law. So she says, if men made the law, then you cannot apply the rule of law without applying the rule of man. So where those laws are discriminatory, we need to come back to it, whether it is in relation to access to land or other assets.